Hi, Sebastian. Great to connect on the podcast today.
Nate, I'm super pumped for this. I'm becoming a fan of your show. I've been listening to prior episodes. Awesome.
Very kind of you, and I'm intrigued by your work as well, both the work you do in finance and in, of course, the psychology of leadership, because my PhD is in organizational behavior, which is basically social psych. I teach leadership, and so I'm quite intrigued by the work you're doing. And as you think back on maybe an experience you've had where you learned something about leadership, finance that you would most want to pass on to others.
I like that question. It was a critical moment a few years ago, Nate, where I was stressed at work. And you know what? Money management is pretty stressful.
Yeah.
But I was also stressing about stressing. I was telling myself, you've been doing this for 25 years. Why are you anxious about this? And I ended up talking to a sports psychologist. His name is Dr. Daniel Zimmett. He lives in Maryland, where I am. The first time we sat down, we had this conversation about his best handball match ever. Now, I should tell you about Dr. Zimmett. He's a PhD sports psychologist, but he's also a pro athlete. He's got his mental game figured out. He has 40, Nate, 40 national titles
Wow.
in the sport of handball. This is kind of like squash, but you whack the ball with your
Yep.
hands, if you're familiar with that
Uh-huh.
sport. So we sit down and he tells me the story of his best match ever. It's fascinating because the match took place 10 years prior, but he remembers everything about it in detail. He's telling me, oh, in the second point, the ball hit that wall and then that wall. And at some point, there's emotion. I can tell he's reliving the match 10 years prior. And he's got like almost like a tear in his eyes. And he said, I was on my knees and make the extreme shot that was impossible. But then something strange happens. It's kind of a letdown because he goes, oh, and I lost the next 2 points. And I go, wait, what? You lost the match? This was your best match you played ever? This was his way of introducing the mindset of a sports psychologist to me. This day to him, he was playing a much stronger opponent and realized that his ability to play at a higher level he had just made a huge jump.
Mm.
So for him, winning or losing meant very little. It was more about the process and the development of his skills. We then started talking about things like intrinsic motivation versus ego driven motivation. Lots of research in sports psychology about this. I just became absolutely fascinated by everything sports and positive psychology, which led to the book, The Psychology of Leadership. So if you ask me about a pivotal moment, I'm stressed at work. I sit down with Dr. Daniel Zimmett and he tells me this story about this match, this fascinating story. I ended up opening the book with it to set the scene.
What a great story that applies to all of us in a very outcome driven world. And I love the mindset of it's the process that matters. So, how did you go on to apply this in your own life? I mean, one, you wrote a book about it, but in what other ways have you applied this learning and others?
In the book, I write in the introduction, you're reading this book for self improvement. I wrote it for the same reason.
Hmm.
So, as I was doing research on sports, eventually positive and also personality psychology, I was uncovering principles to improve my own leadership. This was absolutely a self improvement journey. A lot of it has to do with dealing with uncertainty. If you think about money management, for example, we make a lot of decisions under uncertainty.
Mhm.
There's a great example of the mindset that I've found is extremely useful in many areas of life and in leadership, and has been part of my journey. Sports psychology, if you think of the Zimmett story, it's not about winning at all.
Yeah.
Sports psychology is all about losing. Sports psychologists are fascinated with what you do with the loss, how you handle the loss, because that's where progress comes from. Nate, did you catch Roger Federer? I think now it's maybe 2 years ago when he spoke to the students at
Yes.
Dartmouth for
Yeah.
their commencement.
Fantastic speech.
This went viral, and I hope your people listening to this can go and find it online. It's everywhere.
I'll post a link in the notes.
Yeah, and look, Federer has this discussion where he goes, I have played 1,500 matches in my career. This is one of the best tennis players of all time. And then he goes, I won 80% of those matches. But then, I don't know if you remember from that video, he asked the students, what percentage of the points I played do you think I won?
Yeah.
Do you remember, Nate, what
It
that is?
was like 55 or something like
Yeah, it
that.
was 54%.
Yeah.
So Federer, one of the top tennis players of all time, lost close to half the points he ever played. And then he said a bunch of really profound things. He looked at the students, these eager students entering the world of work, and he said, whatever game you play in life, you're going to lose. He also said, effortless excellence is a myth.
Mhm.
If you think of this mindset for things like money management, we don't have a crystal ball. Having a hit ratio on your investment decisions of 54% in money management is phenomenal. So you start thinking about outcomes, and then you start thinking about how you make decisions and whether your process is the right process and kind of separating the two. I'm a huge fan of Annie Duke. She's an
Yeah.
ex-pro tennis player. Have you had her on your
Former
show?
guest of the podcast.
Awesome. She's fantastic. She ended up writing a blurb for the book, but she talks a lot about what we call resulting, separating the outcomes from the quality of the decisions. She'll say things like outcomes are only very loose signals of the quality of your decisions. I like to use this example. Imagine that you go out to dinner with friends and you drink a whole bottle of wine because you're having a great time, and you decide to drive home and you make it home safely. Okay, let's talk about outcomes versus decisions. Great outcome. You made it home safely. Horrible decision. Or suppose you get in an Uber instead of driving home because you're responsible, but the Uber crashes. Horrible outcome. It was the right decision.
Yeah.
So Annie Duke says outcomes are very loose signals of the quality of your decisions. Federer losing a point is a very loose signal of the quality of his training and his process, and he loses a bunch of them. So it all rolls back up to this mindset that comes from sports psychology that you can apply in so many ways in life.
Well, you are certainly preaching to the choir right now because I just love Annie Duke's work. I taught at a summit 2 days ago, and I opened with Annie Duke and the importance of good decisions and how the only two things that determine the outcome of your life are luck and the decisions you make. So, as you've gone on this journey and you've been applying sports psychology to managing money in your career and leadership, what has most surprised you?
How leadership is different from what we think it is. How high performing leadership requires you to think about things completely differently than we normally do. And so, in the psychology of leadership, there are all these counterintuitive principles. Nate, let me describe to you the ideal leaders. And it's not a trick question. Just let me know if that sounds like a great leader. Okay, she's an outstanding communicator, very good at inspiring others. She's very decisive. She's very resilient. She has tenacity. She doesn't quit. And she's very calm under pressure. Doesn't that sound like the perfect leader,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
But in fact, if you read the psychology of leadership, you learn these principles that some of them I've applied directly in my own leadership journey that are the opposite. So as you go up an organization and you manage larger and larger teams, it's not about your communication skills as much as your ability to listen.
Hmm.
And so leadership at a top level involves way more listening than people think. And that's the prized skill of top level leaders. On this idea of not giving up and being tenacious, right? The way I describe your ideal leader. Annie Duke will tell you people are horrible at quitting decisions. That's the skill. Are you able as a leader to give up on something where the organization has invested so much? That's also counterintuitive. And on being decisive. Yes, being decisive is important. But again, top level, high performing leadership, you also need to exercise strategic patience. Very rare skill. So I worked for a leader who was awesome at this. If he had to make a quick decision, he would. He was decisive. But then if the decision did not require immediate action, he would do something that most leaders in our business in multiple industries do not do. He would wait and see. He would exercise strategic patience. He would learn from what the competitors are doing and failing. And so, in different ways, leadership is just not what you think it is. It's about listening. It's about sometimes being less decisive. It's about, just knowing when to quit. And so, I'm giving you kind of a flip side portrait, if you will, of some leadership skills that we don't think enough about.
I was interviewing Sabina Nawaz, former executive at Microsoft, and one of the lines that she said that stuck with me is what leaders say gets amplified on the way down, and what direct reports say gets muted on the way up,
Yeah.
which emphasized the importance of if you really want to know what's going on in the company, you have to be a very good listener. And so I thinking about what she said and hearing what you say, somebody with your experience at managing so many people or somebody with your leadership experience, it does hit home like the importance of listening and how that is a skill that is so underappreciated. I had um, Avi Kluger on the podcast recently. He's a listening expert from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And Avi has dedicated his whole life to becoming a better listener. Every day he wants to become a better listener. And it is one of the most underappreciated skills. There's research showing that business schools teach way more communication and presentation than listening, yet employers value good listeners. And so you're just driving this home for me. And it's something I still probably don't appreciate enough, the value of listening, but not just listening. You make other great points about, yeah, it's good to be decisive when a decisive leader is needed, but sometimes you need a leader to not be so decisive. And Annie Duke wrote a whole book on knowing when to quit. So I just really appreciate these lessons.
Thank you. Look, again, leadership's not always what you think it is. And sometimes it's counterintuitive, especially if you want to reach the higher levels of it.
Any final things you'd like to share as we wrap up here, Sebastian?
Nate, I'll say this. I was asked a few months ago to give advice to a group of students at the MIT. These are students in finance. They have their career lined up for them. They don't really need my advice. A lot of them have already had Wall Street internships. They're top students. Employers are going to want to hire them. So I'm thinking, what should I tell them that will actually help them in their journey? They don't really need my career advice. They're going to have great careers. Employers are going to be after them as soon as they graduate. This is the MIT Sloan School of Business. This is what I ended up saying as my key message to them. And maybe for our audience today, we talk about high performance, sports psychology, the mental game, learning to lose. What I ended up telling the MIT students, looking at them, seeing they're all tired and stressed, I said, take care of yourselves. I encouraged them. It's, they didn't expect a business person to come in and say this, to get good sleep,
Hmm.
eat a decent diet, and exercise every day. And we talk about all these things that you can do to improve your career. And sometimes we forget the basics. What runs the engine? Sleep, diet, exercise. You have to get all three to work together. You can't drop one and focus on the other two. I'd rather you get better 10% at sleep, diet, and exercise each than go and exercise like crazy but not do the other ones and so on. So I'll just leave it at that. I think it's just something we don't think about enough sometimes. When all ambitious people, we don't think about it.
This is perfect for a couple of reasons. I just interviewed Brian Porter, hedge fund analyst, portfolio manager at MIG Capital, managing multi-billion dollar fund. And we just did a 2 hour episode on sleep, diet, and exercise. And Brian is
Awesome.
one of those guys, former Carlisle guy, Stanford MBA. He is, one of those guys that obsesses about things in a good way and learns all he can. And so we've got a great episode on sleep, diet, and exercise that it just posted. I just interviewed Admiral Stavridis, one of the most accomplished leaders in the world. And his first lesson that he shared was take care of your body because if you don't have energy, you can't be
Yeah.
a great leader. And now you also incredible leadership experience, combining leadership and psychology, and your final takeaway is take care of your health. So these are three people in just the last couple months that have all talked about this. It's timely, it's perfect. I couldn't agree more. I love these lessons. I want to remember to, even though I teach, don't fall prey to the outcome bias. Hearing that story of Daniel Zimmett talk about his greatest match was a loss. So much to think about, so much great content, Sebastian. Thanks so much for sharing these lessons today.
Thank you, Nate. That was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.